Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. There's a project I've been working on for the last few weeks and I'm excited to show it to you today. It is a 75mm 1S whoop and it weighs just 16.8 grams. As far as I know, that makes this the lightest 75mm whoop anywhere in the world today. If you've ever heard of one that's lighter, that's impressive. I'd love to hear about it down in the comment section below. But I am super excited about this one because the performance is amazing. I have never flown a 1S whoop that handled as well as this one has, and I have flown a lot of 1S whoops. This one is pretty cool. It's super fast, it's agile, and it's ridiculously efficient, flying for up to 8 minutes. I think this is probably my favorite 1S whoop now, and I'm pretty excited about that. I'm going to be flying it a whole bunch more, and it's perfect timing because I live near Seattle and the rainy months are coming, but I can fly this in the house and have a great time. So I'm pretty excited about it. I hope you're excited too. If you want to know how to build something that's better than anything you can buy, then you are in the right place. I'm going to tell you all about this build, but first, let's check out some flight footage right here in my basement just for fun. This drone is the same size as something like the Meteor 75 or the Emax Tiny Hawk, but those drones are usually around 30 grams dry weight, 40 to 45 grams with a battery, so this is almost half the weight. And I've got nothing against those other drones, but imagine what it does to the performance if you can remove that much weight. In fact, this is lighter than any 65mm drone on the market as well. The only FPV drone I have that's lighter is this one right here. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you might remember this build. I made a video about it about a year ago. It was 15.3 grams, lightest brushless whoop anywhere in the world at the time. And this was a remarkable build. It was super fun. It's super light. But this new one is just flat out better. And it makes sense. This is only 1.5 grams heavier than the 65mm build. When you consider a battery, that's like a 7% increase in weight. But it's like a 66% increase in prop area. And that gives it even better handling. It makes it faster. And the efficiency really goes up. And efficiency was kind of a nice surprise with this build. If I were going to use this for competitive racing right now, I would not use a battery any bigger than one of these 250s because I can get 3 to 3.5 minutes of flying on an indoor track no matter how hard I push it with one of these batteries. And if I stepped up to something like a Tiny Whoop 333, this is an amazing battery, but if I flew with one of these, I could do 2 races back to back, no problem. And one time, just to see what would happen, I put a 450 in here as well. These flat batteries fit in the frame as well. And so I just cruised around to see how long it would last, and it flew for over 8 minutes. I'm not making this stuff up. Eight minutes. Oh man. 8 minutes is a really long time when you're flying. Here's a closer look at the drone itself. It's super low profile because I've got the camera out in front and no canopy on top. And again, this is a 75mm whoop frame, which means these are 40mm props. They happen to be customized 2-blade props running on 0802 brushless motors. Now, having 0802 motors on a 75mm frame is really nothing new. This is a tried and true formula. They're really easy to build. If you just take a Meteor 65 or a Mobula 6, swap those parts onto a 75mm frame, you're going to have a great build. A lot of people have already done that. But with this build, what I've done is I've really reduced the weight. And I think it kind of pushes it into a new performance category. I've also got a new tune on here, which is part of it, and I'll tell you all about that stuff in just a minute. But first, I want to say one more thing about weight, because I just can't stress enough how important weight is to the performance of a whoop. Now, there's a lot of obvious reasons why weight would be so important. You know, a lighter drone is going to accelerate faster and have less momentum to worry about. That's pretty obvious. When it comes to whoops, however, there's a flexible frame. And so if you put too much load you just can't make up for it with extra torque, because if you do, you're torquing the frame and that just ruins your flight performance. And that's pretty obvious as well. But there's one more reason that I want to focus on. Think about a heavier drone for just a minute. This one has 2.5-inch props and a 4K HD camera, so it's packing a lot more weight, but it's also got a lot of punch. So power to weight ratio is not a problem. The all-up weight is the problem if you're trying to fly this inside the house. You've got a lot of weight pushing down, so you've got a lot of thrust pushing up, a slight tilt like this, and the thrust is angled, and that turns into a lot of speed. If you want to take those turns fast, you've got to really dig into the turns a lot more. But if you pitch like this on a heavy drone, you're either going to fall or you're going to shoot out really fast. And see, the thing is, when I race on a track or I race in the house, I am almost never limited by the speed of my drone. I'm limited by the speed of me, right? Like my own ability to control it. And so shooting out too fast is just not an option. But when you have something that's lighter, you can actually use more forward pitch. You can dig harder into the turns, and so you can manage the speed that you have a lot better. Take a look at this turn on the track that I set up. Some of these turns, the drone is banked almost 90 degrees. And to me, that makes the speed more usable and more fun. All right, enough talk. Let me just show you what it looks like to race this thing around that track in my house as fast as I can go while still maintaining that precision. How can you build a 1S whoop that flies like this one? Well, like I said, you could start with a 65mm whoop and swap it onto a 70mm frame with 40mm props. If you combine that with a good tune, you're going to have something that already flies better than most bind and fly drones, but it's not going to be as light as this one. I had to do a bunch of tricks to get the weight down. I had to do a bunch of investigation to figure out which components would be the lightest. And as I did all of that, I found a bunch of interesting design choices along the way, and so that's what I want to talk about now. After we talk about the build, I do have some outdoor acro footage that I want to show you too. I really took some chances with this one, and I'll show you how that turned out in just a minute. All right, let's start by talking about these motors. They're Happy Model EX0802 19,000 kV. And 0802 is my favorite size for 1S whoops, and really has been for a very long time, ever since the size was introduced back in the fall of 2018, actually. The Beta 65X was the first one. It had 17,500 kV motors, and it was a 2S, and that was way too high for a 2S, but they turned out to be great 1S motors. And the Mobula 7 came out that year as well, so I feel like I should mention it. This is the Mobula 7 frame, and it had the same size motors, so of all the bind and flies I can think of, it's probably still the most similar to what I'm showing you today, only mine is of course a lot lighter and has higher kV. I was excited when Happy Model introduced this specific motor because this is easily the lightest 0802 motor on the market right now. I actually bought a Mobula 6 HD just so I could get a set of those motors. Fortunately, they do sell the motors by themselves now, and here's how they compare in weight to the others that I have. As some of you might have guessed, the motors are held on by Rennie screws. Rennie is a composite of fiberglass and nylon, and it's a lot lighter than these metal screws that usually come with the motors. This frame is the Mobula 7 V2 frame, but I also considered the Beta 75 Pro frame. This is the one with the 1S slot, not the 2S version, which is heavier. Of the two, the Beta 75 Pro frame is a whole lot more durable. It's a stiffer, stronger material than this one. And so this is a great frame, but the Mobula 7 frame is lighter, and that's why I chose it. I could probably actually shave away some of this material and make them closer in weight, but I didn't think I could get it quite to the level of the Mobula 7 frame, and so that's why I chose this one. And I think this is going to be durable enough because the weight is so low. There's very little momentum going into a crash. I even shaved away some of the material with a razor blade. I don't know if you can see that here, but I just kind of lifted the bottom of some of these hoops, but I did not touch the front. The front ones are full size for durability. And the only break that I've had is right here, and that was a pretty hard crash. I was power looping the deck in my backyard and I missed and smacked straight down into the roof. But no biggie, I fixed it up with some E6000 glue. If you fly whoops, I highly recommend you get some of this glue or the red Welder brand glue. That'll work too, and you can fix these frames right up. For a drone this size, I would usually fly 3 or 4 blade props. Like these gem fan props are great. I've never actually tried 2 blade props in this size, and nobody actually makes 2 blade props in the 40mm size. I wish they would, but I wanted to try it out, and so I took the lightest 4 blade prop. This is the HQ 16x16x4, and I literally just clipped off 2 of the wings to put it on here. Now, when I first did that, it was for the weight. I honestly didn't expect to like this as much as the 3 or 4 blade props because it's a low pitch and it's just the 2 blades. I thought it wouldn't have enough grip in the corners, but it totally does. It can accelerate super fast because the drone is so light. And what I really appreciate is that the 2 blade props are super responsive and the stick is really responsive all the way through the range. Even on the high end, I feel like I've got good throttle resolution. So I am really liking these props. And honestly, I think these props are also a big part of the reason the efficiency is so good. All right, let's switch gears for a minute. I want to show you some more flight footage. You've already seen what it looks like inside the house, but I was really curious how well it would transition to outdoor acro. So I wanted to find out. I took it in the backyard. Let me show you how that went, and then stick around because there's a few more things I want to say about the build and the custom tune that I put on here, which gave me an extra 30 seconds of flight time. All right, I could put a lot bigger battery in here, but let's try it with this tiny little 250 milliamp hour battery and see how much fun we can have with just that. Picking a flight controller was actually one of the harder decisions to make because there's multiple good options. This is the FPV Cycle board. It's designed for the baby tooth, and it's great for that sort of thing, but it does not come with a receiver or a video transmitter. By the time you add that stuff, it's not going to be as light. Same thing with this B-Brain brushless. It's also pretty beefy, does not have a built-in receiver. Once you add one, it's not going to be the lightest. So these are great boards, but not for this particular build. I thought for sure I would end up using one of these two. This is the Beta FPV all-in-one with the VTX and receiver built in, and this is the Crazy Bee F4 Lite. Same thing, built-in receiver and built-in VTX. The way these boards come from the factory, the Beta FPV one is heavier, but that's because it has the BT 2.0 connector and it has an actual dipole antenna instead of the little wire that comes on the Crazy Bee board. Now, I'm the kind of person who would want to remove all of that kind of stuff because I want to customize everything. So I wanted to know what the actual weight would be once I stripped them down, and it turns out that these two boards are actually exactly the same weight to 2 decimal places on my scale if you remove all of those accessories. You can see this Crazy Bee board has no more motor plugs on it because I was doing some testing with this. Removing those plugs and direct soldering the motors, it's a fair amount of work and it's not without risk, so take that into account if you're new to soldering. But if you do the work, here's how much total material you can remove, and that's the plugs from the board and from the motors. But it turns out the lightest option is actually this Beta FPV F4 flight controller. It does have a built-in receiver, and you can see the red wire there, although I flipped the antenna around to the underside so it wouldn't catch on anything and it just runs out through the side of the frame. But this is only the lightest option if you combine it with a really light VTX and a really light antenna. For that, I am using the Nameless RC Nano. You can see it in there. It's separated from the board by a little piece of Kapton tape. And you can see I've got a custom VTX antenna that I built. It's using UFL right there. And in fact, I could remove that UFL connector and direct solder the antenna. If I did that, it would save another 1/10 of a gram. Here you can see the weight of the board the way it comes from the factory, and then without the power lead, without the plugs, and then finally with the new power lead, the VTX, the custom antenna, everything all ready to go into the drone, 3.8 grams. And so that's the lightest package combination that I was able to find, but admittedly it's only 1/10 of a gram lighter than one of these with similar customizations. And these ones have the video transmitter built in, and that just makes for a way cleaner build. If you were going to build something like this, I'd suggest you use one of these two boards. It'll just be cleaner and almost as light. There are no screws holding the flight controller either. It's held by grommets, although I actually cut the grommets in half, so it's half a grommet per post. And the posts I actually melted with my soldering iron coming straight down from the top, which causes the plastic to kind of spread out, and that's what keeps it from popping out this way. Even in the hardest crash, I have not had any problem with this flight controller coming out, but if I did need to get it out, I could actually bend the frame and kind of pop it out that way. As you can see, I've got a PH2 connector on the battery lead, and the battery lead is exactly the right length for these 250 milliamp hour batteries that I've been using. The battery just slides in kind of at an angle this way and then straightens out and then pushes back in an angle so it doesn't hit the camera. You might be wondering why the power lead is in the front. And the answer for that is I also use different length batteries. The longest ones are these Tiny Whoop 333s. You can see how it goes here. If it was the other way, this would actually hit the camera. This way, the longer batteries just kind of hang out a little bit more in the back, and it flies fine that way. And in a crash, the battery would push into the power lead this way, and the power lead actually stops it from hitting the camera. And then this foam in here just makes it a little bit more secure when you're using the stick batteries. I'd take that out if I wanted to use one of the flat ones, and the flat ones can actually slide in from that side. And because I'm crazy about weight, you can see I actually removed the silicone shielding from the ground wire. Not the positive wire, just the ground wire, and that's pretty safe. The only thing it could touch is the USB, which is also grounded. By the way, that USB is still on there. Removing that would save a little bit of weight too. Then there's the camera. This is the Runcam Nano 3. It happens to be one with the original lens, last one that I had, but this is the lightest FPV camera that I know of. It's just over 1 gram if you take all the wires off. And to mount it, I just put a notch in the frame, got it to the angle that I wanted, and used some E6000 glue on both sides. The camera wires are a little bit hard to see, but that's another place I saved some weight. That copper color is actually motor winding from an old motor that I pulled apart. This stuff looks like it would short out, but it's actually got a thin coating on it that insulates, So all those wires are running back here to my VTX. Now this wire kinks pretty easily, and if I had to repair it, that'd be kind of a pain because all three wires look exactly the same. I'd have to be super careful. If I was doing it again, I would use this rework wire because it doesn't kink as easily, it comes in different colors, and it's almost as light. All right, so the last thing to talk about is the firmware settings, and I saved it for last, but it's actually really important, both for the efficiency of the drone and of course, just getting the feel of the drone the way that you want. So we gotta start with the ESCs. The particular flight controller I used happens to be one of the older ones with the L-type ESCs, but that's no problem. I flashed it with JESC version 2.3 that supports both the L-type and the H-type ESCs with bidirectional D-shot, and I'm running 48 kilohertz. 48 kilohertz helps with the battery life just like it does on smaller whoops, and so that is a big win, and you can see the other settings here, including the motor timing and startup power. For the flight controller, I am running Betaflight, but it's been a long time since I updated my tune for a racing whoop, so I thought it would be interesting to install the latest version of Betaflight, learn about some of the new features, and try to tune it out for this one, and I'm super happy with the results. Here you can see where I ended up on the PID tuning page. Feel free to pause it. And here are my rates. Now this is going to result in a very fast, very twitchy, very responsive drone, but I love it because it's very predictable once you get used to it. But a real part of the magic actually comes from the filters. When I came in here at first, I took the sliders and I moved them all the way to the right because I wanted to have low latency in my PID loop. And when I did that, I flew it. It sounded fine. It was quiet. It flew great. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought that everything was working fine, but I had already flown it on a previous tune, and so I noticed that turning those sliders all the way to the right actually cut like 30 seconds off my flight time. So there must have been some noise and little vibrations that the motor was constantly adjusting for, and I had to get rid of that. But I didn't want to turn the sliders back. I didn't want to reintroduce that latency. So the solution was to leave the sliders to the right, let the RPM filter take care of all that high frequency noise, and then for the dynamic filter, I limited it to 1 notch and only in a low frequency range. And the idea is that the dynamic notch takes care of any oscillation from the frame, and the RPM filter takes care of everything else. And when I tried that combination, not only did I get the flight time back, I got an extra 30 seconds. So it was the most efficient combination, and it flies great. So I'm super happy about that. And this particular tip about the filters came from UAV Tech. That is an awesome YouTube channel. If you want to learn more about Betaflight, I'd suggest you check that out. This has been a fun video to make and a very interesting building project for me. I'm trying new stuff and learning things all the time, and I love that about this hobby. Hopefully I was able to give you some good tips and ideas about your next build as well. You could take some of them or all of them, or you may have suggestions of your own. I'd love to hear about that down in the comment section. But whatever the case, I hope I've inspired you to go out and build something new. Maybe try building something lighter than you ever have before. That's pretty cool. I'm excited about this stuff. I hope you are too. If so, it'd be cool if you could hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I do have some more interesting custom build projects coming up in the near future, so stick around for that. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.